dude. Don't come through the door. I will shoot.
Hi, I'm Joel Persinger. I'm the Gun Guy. Thank you very much for all of your support of GunGuyTV. I'm super grateful. I'll remind you again that this is an election year, and YouTube is just smashing the tar out of my channel. I mean, it's just 90-some-odd% reduction in views and interactions. I mean, it's amazing. It's just fallen off a cliff here because they've squashed me. I think it's probably because of the election year. So go to X and Rumble, please, and follow me over there. We're on both of those platforms, neither one of which censor me at all. And I would love to grow the following there so that you'll actually, if you're on Rumble or you're on X, you're actually going to see it in your feed. If you're on Rumble, you'll actually get a notification that I published a video. On YouTube, I keep hearing from people all the time saying that they've been unsubscribed or they're not getting it in their feed or they're not getting the notifications or whatever. That's YouTube playing games. All right, that's enough of that. We're going to talk to Dan O'Kelly today, and one of the things I want to talk with Dan about, since he spent 2.5 decades at ATF, is how does the recent decisions against ATF, I mean, we've had basically four. You've had the receiver case that they lost. You've had the recent injunction against forcing everybody to be a dealer if you sell one firearm. You've had the pistol brace case in the district court. And just the other day, a few days ago, the Supreme Court threw out the whole bump stock ban. This has all been procedures type mistakes that ATF has done where they've just made up rules. I want to find out from Dan what other things he sees coming that ATF is likely to lose. So let's go talk to Dan and find out. Dan O'Kelly, thank you very much for joining me again, my friend. It's been a while. I haven't seen you in quite some time. You've been running around the country, and I've been busier than crazy over here. But a lot has happened in the court system with ATF. And just some of the ones we were talking about before we started, the receiver case, ATF took a beating there. The whole thing where you have to be a dealer if you sell one gun, that is not done yet, as you were saying before we started, but there was an injunction against it. And then, of course, the pistol brace, which was on a district court level, and then the Supreme Court just threw out the whole bump stock thing. And so what are your thoughts on these? Because we have other cases. These are all Administrative Procedures Act things, I think. None of them were Second Amendment decisions. In other words, they all affect the Second Amendment, but none of them were decided based upon a question as to whether this was constitutional under the Second Amendment. It was all decided, I think, because the ATF, like a lot of these administrative agencies, goes wonky and goes outside their authority and just starts making up stuff they can't make up. How does this affect other things? I mean, do we have other cases coming they're going to continue to take losses on?
Yeah, I think they're going to, as a direct result of this, going to take a loss on the forced reset trigger issue also, because this one was decided more on a technical issue, that being, in the definition of a machine gun, that you go through the verbiage in that definition, and it's all descriptive until you get to the key phrase, by a single function of the trigger. And that's what was at issue here. ATF, in every one of these cases that I've been involved in, you had to almost bite your lip to keep from laughing, because they would start out with quoting the definition of a machine gun, which, ends with by the single function of a trigger, and then go on at length about what the shooter's finger does, not what the trigger does, which is immaterial. So it was decided in this case that a single function of the trigger means a single movement of the trigger. And in a bump stock, the gun only fires, as we all know, one shot per function of the trigger or movement of the trigger to the rear. The trigger moves to the rear to release the hammer for one shot fired, and then it has to move all the way forward, re-engage with the hammer, and then repeatedly move to the rear to disengage the hammer and fire one more shot. That's semi-automatic. So the Supreme Court clarified that for ATF. That's pretty funny in itself because ATF said for the first 10 years bump stocks were out. No, these are not machine guns. We realize they're semi-automatics. They are not machine guns, and they put it in writing in countless letters to the public, to FFLs, what have you. And then once Trump in 2017 told them, hey, find a way, rather than telling him, look, Mr. President, you need to lean on Congress to change the definition of a machine gun if you have a problem with this, because this thing isn't a machine gun. We've said it's not a machine gun for 10 years, and it's still not a machine gun. Nothing changed overnight. Well, he told them find a way, and again, they caved, and they found a way to change their mind. So miraculously, the next morning, they all woke up, all these people that work in firearm technology division, and then, of course, their legal counsel people, they all woke up the next morning and said, no, these are machine guns. We all just had a change of heart overnight. Well, ATF was put in their place by the Supreme Court, and it's been pointed out to them again. No, it's not. You don't get to do that. So that same thing is going to happen, in my humble opinion, on forced reset triggers, which is also waiting for, the highest court's decision. And those in the exact same way, fire one shot per function of the trigger, just like a bump stock.
Now, do you think it's also going to have the similar effect on things like the binary trigger? I think that's a brand name, but those kinds of triggers where they fire once when you press a trigger and once when you let go. Are we talking about basically the same thing? You've got one function of the trigger each time that fires around.
This isn't going to affect that. I don't see how it could, because ATF is fine with binary triggers, as they should be. And the ironic thing is, look at a binary trigger and you see that for every time the trigger comes to the rear and then goes back forward, a binary trigger fires 2 shots. It's still only firing, granted, it's only firing 1 shot per function of the trigger. Every time a binary trigger comes to the rear, it releases the hammer, it performs a function. And every time it goes forward, it releases the hammer again, which has already re-engaged with the trigger or the sear because of the way it was designed and engineered. But the fact is, for every time, a binary comes to the rear and goes back forward, it fires 2 shots. Well, ATF's fine with that, always has been. But yet, a forced reset or a bump stock, every time the trigger comes to the rear and goes forward once, it fires 1 shot. But oh no, that's a machine gun to them. They really are laughable.
Well, it seems like their only concern is how fast the firearm shoots, not how it shoots fast, as you've said. But that's not the way the statute is written. The statute is concerned with how it shoots fast, not how fast it shoots. And that's where it kind of goes sideways with this whole thing. It's interesting watching the Supreme Court and the federal courts take these administrative agencies to task, because they really are, they're not even in our Constitution. We're supposed to have an executive branch, a judicial branch, and a legislative branch. This administrative state thing should never have had the ability to make rules which have the force and effect of law, particularly when they're outside the parameters of the individual statute itself. But they all do it. It's not just ATF. EPA does it, the Department of Education, to find one. They all do it. And it does seem like the court is actively knocking this down to try to rein them in and keep them from doing that kind of stuff. So, I don't know. Are there other things like they had the whole receiver thing was the same thing. They wanted to take an AR-15 receiver and call it a firearm. It's never been a firearm under the definition, ever. And you've testified 1,000,000 times on that. What other things are you seeing coming down the road where ATF is going to take a beating over the decisions they've made with regard to firearms that are outside the statute?
They're going to most likely lose on brace. They're going to lose on braces, because it, just like bump stocks, for the first, I forget the number of years, seems like it was 10 years, that braces were out. And ATF said, no, these are not stocks. If you intentionally use it as a stock against your shoulder, then that redesigns it, and we're going to go after you. But it was not designed and intended to be a stock. They even said in that one 2017 letter that even further muddied the waters that, it can go against your shoulder inadvertently. I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but if it goes against your shoulder due to a string of rapid fire, they were referring to a string of rapid fire where recoil puts it against your shoulder, but that wasn't your intent. That's not even a problem. So after however many years of that, they wake up the next day and they go, oh, we just all miraculously changed our mind 180 degrees overnight. That's the thing. The people in firearm technology will go to court on a Tuesday and they will hold their hand up and swear to tell the truth. So hope they God, yes, a brace is not a stock. Yes, a bump stock is not a machine gun. And the very next day, hold their hand up and swear to tell the truth, so help them God. Yes, a brace is a stock. And yes, a bump stock is a machine gun. And yet these items didn't change one tiny bit overnight, nor did the law.
What drives that other than just a political wind changing? Is that it? I mean, is that some congressman, some senator, or in the case of Trump, some president walks in and says, you will do this, and they just seem to, they don't want to buck it. They just go and do it even if they know it's wrong. I think that's one of the things that disturbs me. I mean, they should be able to have enough cojones to say to these politicians, I'm sorry, sir, ma'am, whatever, but unfortunately, that's not legal. You're going to have to go back to Congress and get that through Congress. But they don't.
There's an interchange. I posted on LinkedIn a couple of days ago about this issue, and there's been a lot of responses and comments if anyone wants to look at that. And the point is, a lot of people have pointed out, look, if you work for the government, if you work for the executive branch, and your boss tells you to do something and you tell him no, well, that's insubordination. And depending on how high you are, you're going to find yourself transferred to God knows where, as a result, and they'll replace you with somebody else. Well, I agree. I admit that's true. Of course it's true. But where do you draw the line? When they're telling you to do something that you just said yesterday under oath isn't the case, now today you're going to go say under oath that it is the case. Where is your integrity? Where do you draw the line and say, no, we cannot do this? If we're going to have any integrity, if we're going to have any scruples, I just don't get that part. At some point, you have to put your foot down and say, I'm sorry, this is not going to happen. You're going to have to find somebody else.
Well, and then you accept the consequences, whatever they are, knowing that there might be some negative consequences there, and then you can drag them into court. One of the things I find interesting about the whole bump stock thing is, on the one hand, first of all, I've said before, I said it in a video I posted the other day when I was trying to explain how our government works, because so many people graduated from school after they had civics classes and those kind of things in high school, and so they don't teach it anymore. But in the process, I said, I kind of like, in many ways, I like former President Donald Trump. I love the fact that he just says what he means and means what he says, and he doesn't try to sugarcoat it. Sometimes that gets him in trouble. And, this is a world in which if you sneeze the wrong way, you're making somebody mad. But having been pretty blunt most of my life and say what I mean and mean what I say, me, I rather appreciate that about him. But he doesn't always do things I agree with, and certainly the bump stock thing was not one of them. Certainly one of the things he said about let's take the guns first and the due process later, he gets that hung around his neck a lot. And I get it. I totally get it. But what I find fascinating about this is, on the one hand, so he gets a hold of ATF and he says, okay, this happened in Las Vegas, and they say that this guy used this thing. I don't even know what that is. We need to ban that. Find a way. But he also appointed the very Supreme Court justices and the federal judges who found that that's not legal. So on the one hand, because of Trump, we've had a bump stock ban for quite some time now. And because of Trump, it just got tossed.
Well, let me
you
offer.
Can't make this stuff up. That's interesting.
Let me offer a different angle on that. The way
sure, go ahead.
Trump told them, make this happen. Well, they should have had a chat with them where they said, look, the way to make it happen where it's going to have any legs is to give go to Congress and say, look, you need to add a definition to, well, you need to modify the definition of a machine gun because there's, and I'm not an attorney once again, but there's legally only one definition of a machine gun, but as you read it, it covers 4 different things. So I commonly say there are 4 definitions of a machine gun under the NFA, Title 26. So in other words, they should have, said to him, hey, we need to have Congress make a 5th definition of a machine gun, something that by verbiage would have covered bump stocks if they have a problem with that, if they so intend to carry that out. But their methodology they used was to, I guess I picture them mulling this over and saying, okay, the word automatically that's in the present definition, let's play with that word. What do we really think that means? Well, it doesn't matter what you think it means, ATF. It means what it means or what a court says it means. And that's all they did. Well, now as far as we're concerned, the word automatically covers what a bump stock does. So abracadabra, it's a machine gun. And that was so thin that, here you are. Yeah, it had to drag out for 7 years.
Well, and it blew up in their face
out.
because Thomas went through this whole thing. Even if it did do more than one thing with a single function of the trigger, it wouldn't do it automatically. So that got destroyed by the court too. So not only can they not twist what automatically means, they can't play with the definition either because it both got terribly clarified.
And vice versa, even if it does it automatically,
it doesn't do it
by a single function of the trigger.
Right. And so he went both ways with it. It doesn't, no matter what perspective you look at that from, it doesn't work. You're right about something, and I think it deserves clarification. And I said it again, if you're watching this and you didn't watch the video I posted the other day, I urge you to go back and watch that. It is most of the time, unless there's incredible agreement because of some public outrage, most of the bills proposed in the United States Congress or in any state a state legislature never become law because it's really hard to get a bill to pass both houses, and it goes back and forth. It's got to go to conference. It's really hard to get the darn thing to pass one house, and so it's very, very rare that any bill becomes law. And even if you get it passed in the federal system, even if you get it past the House and it goes into the Senate, then the Senate sends it back because they changed it, then the House wants to change it, and then they go, it'll ping pong back and forth. Eventually, if it gets to the president doesn't like it, all that work is for naught because he just vetoes it and it's done. Well, that's where we want this discussion to occur. Rather than short-circuiting Congress for the purpose of just getting it done on a whim by fiat, which is not constitutional, if President Trump or any president wants to change, President Biden currently, which I even have trouble calling him that, but nevertheless, if Biden wanted to change this, guess what Biden's got to do? He's got to go convince enough senators and enough congressmen or women to make a law that he can then sign, which would change the definition. The chances of that happening are fairly small because it's really hard to do. And so anytime somebody's wanting to do something that's going to impact our rights as Americans, it's got to go through the system our founders put together. It's got to go through the House and the Senate. It's got to get to the president, and that's really, really hard. That's the way it should have been done. And maybe at that time, on the heels of the shooting in Nevada, it might have gotten through Congress, maybe. Would it now in an election year? I don't think so. So I think it's probably the bump stocks are pretty safe for a while. We'll see. But again, that's if we're going to have this debate about can we make this law or not, it's got to go through the right process. And afterwards, then the courts can look at it and go, that law you just passed and that law you just signed, sorry, that's unconstitutional. And if it's unconstitutional, they can toss it. That's how our system works. And so the Supreme Court has essentially said, in fact, Justice Alito did in his agreement with it, said, okay, now we've decided this is the way it is. If Congress wants to act, now Congress can act. And so the Supreme Court just took this and said, no, ATF, you can't do this. This goes over here. And I think the more they do that, with ATF in particular, but these unelected bureaucrats, the better off we are, because they're not going to be able to do this magic wand crap and just make stuff illegal or legal based upon which way the political winds blow. That's kind of what I'm seeing. Dan, you deal with this every day. What are your thoughts on this? Am I even close to on track? Am I completely off base? What do you think?
No, you're on track, of course. I see maybe I'll call it the root of the problem. When, ATF went for so many years without an actual director. They had acting directors, people just filling in. Most of the time, those were agents. But the point is, when they bring in somebody from outside the agency, somebody who yesterday was just, a practicing attorney, was a CEO in a company someplace, I don't recall. They've had so many. But the point is, the president waives this directorship in front of somebody, and the salary and the esteem that goes with it. Oh, sure, I'll run ATF. Okay, well, I'll call you every day and tell you what your marching orders are. And then when they get these ridiculous edicts, hey, find a way to call this a machine gun, or try to find a way to call that a short-barreled rifle, or what have you. Yes, sir, 3 bags full. Well, easier said than done, because of the procedure you just described. But the guy is he's not going to have a no come out of his mouth. He's going to say yes. And again, it just comes back to the integrity. ATF is, let me clarify this. In my humble opinion, again, of course, it's not the agents on the street. It's specifically the legal counsel that they run everything through, and these people who work in the firearm technology division. And they've gotten to the point where if somebody tells them from up above, hey, we're going to start calling an apple an orange. Yes, sir. Next day, they'll hold their hand up and testify in court. This apple is actually an orange. It's actually citrus fruit. It's actually segmented like a lemon or a lime or a grapefruit. No, it's not. You can cut one open and look at it, just like you open up these guns and look at them. Look at what features it has. It's utterly ridiculous, because these people don't seem to care if they have any integrity. Strong statement, and I stick by it.
At some point, don't they lose credibility with the court? I mean, there was a time when the court would just defer to whatever ATF said X, Y, or Z was. But it would seem to me that the court system has got to get tired of this kind of switching back and forth crap. At which point, do they at some point stop listening to ATF and make them prove that what they say is true?
Well, the courts in which the judges throw out ATF's nonsense, they, of course, see it for what it is, but yet you don't see them sanctioning the people who testified to the contrary. When I testified in Texas on the forced reset trigger thing last year, I called out the ATF firearm technology expert in court. I said, when I was on the stand, I said, this guy is either he's trying to intentionally mislead this court, or he doesn't know what he's talking about. And I pointed out how, and, judge didn't do anything about it.
And that's a problem too. I'll tell you what, people get frustrated about, I only say this because I hear it all the time. I'm sure you do too. People get frustrated about two things. One is what you just alluded to, that government agents, pick an agency, this is not unique by any means to ATF, can sit in court and essentially, if they want to, lie through their teeth about things, and the court will not punish them over it. We see politicians get away with crap all the time and never be punished for it. except unless you happen to be on the conservative end of things, and then they'll start trying to arrest you and prosecute you and throw you in the clink. So it's applied selectively. It's not applied evenly. And so now you get somebody from Agency B, ATF, FBI, for that matter, EPA, any of them. And they come in and what arguably they present false information to a court. And if the court sanctioned them or punished them for knowingly doing so, then perhaps that behavior would stop. But because they don't ever receive any consequences, it just continues. And yet the citizen says, gee, if I went in and intentionally misled or lied or obfuscated or whatever, when I had put my hand on the Bible and sworn to tell the truth in a court, I would be held in contempt of court if it was found that I did that with any intent, because I'm not a government employee, and so the court's going to punish me for that. And that is a key problem. The other thing you pointed out, and I'd love to hear what your comment is on both, the other thing you pointed out is that at some point the employees at a government agency have to have some integrity. Now, I would argue that that does apply to the field agent. If the field agent knows that something is purely political and is not legal, then I think at some point those agents have to say, that's enough, I'm not going that far anymore. And that does jeopardize their job, I get it. But they took an oath as well, and at some point the average cop on the street has to make the decision. Am I going to stay with my oath when I know that this is wrong? Or am I going to do it because I'm worried about my salary and paying my bills? And, I understand, me, I support cops and for all the reasons that you know about in my life, and I support law enforcement. But I think at the same time, the folks have got to at some point say, my integrity is worth more than this. Anyway, what are your thoughts?
I fully agree that if the court were to make an example out of someone the first time, and find them guilty of perjury. I mean, here are the facts. You can't have two opposing experts testify to 180-degree different facts and they both be true. If one is saying, look, this thing does not satisfy the definition, and the other one says, oh, yes, it does satisfy the definition. Okay, all you have to do is, this is the judge. Well, let's look at the definition. How many elements are in it? It has to do A, B, C, and D. Does it do those? No, it does not. Okay, you're lying, whoever that is. Now find them guilty of perjury. And I'll bet you it'll put a stop to this kind of thing. I testified in a sentencing on a famous case in Norfolk, Virginia, about a year ago. He was an active duty Navy seaman at the time, and they busted him for selling parts kits and whatnot, just parts. And during the sentencing, they tried to count all the flats, the Mac 10 flats that he had, 977 of them toward his sentencing. They were each one going to count as another firearm, which raises his number of years he would get in sentencing. And I testified, these Mac flats are not firearms. Government says, oh, yes, they are. So I put on a PowerPoint and showed, well, here's the requirement for what would make one of them a firearm. No, they're not. Once the judge saw the facts, she threw out all 977 of them. But is the ATF tech who testified, oh, yes, they are, under oath with his hand up, is he in jail for perjury? No. That would have been nice to see that happen. And then I bet you a bunch of that would come to a screeching halt.
Well, he should be, and because he was about to ruin somebody's life for the next 100 years or whatever the case. We can, as a society, we can agree that certain things are illegal and certain things are improper, and we can punish people that do them. But we don't get to artificially make crap up so that we can make sure their sentence is longer. I mean, because then we are doing things that are illegal and inappropriate, and we should be punished for them. It's got to be even-handed. Why do you suppose it isn't? I mean, is this all political? Is this because the courts just don't want to go? I mean, what's the motivation behind letting this stuff go, in your opinion?
Well, by the judges, I couldn't comment. The reason the government or the prosecution, in other words, pushes this stuff is all they know is they want the stats. And for the most part, guns are evil. So if it's, if there's any support for the idea that this counts as a gun, then we're going to count it as gun because, hey, at the end of the day, we're going home anyway. I'll be testifying at a sentencing in downtown Tampa tomorrow on a similar case where a guy had a bunch of flats, and some of them were folded into position toward the process of making them into firearm lowers. But even if they're complete, they don't satisfy the definition of a lower, therefore they're not firearms. And they're trying to count these all, hundreds of these things as firearms and as machine guns, further than that, in an effort to extend his sentencing. And I'll be testifying tomorrow to the facts that no, look, these are not firearm frames, therefore they're not firearms, therefore they're not machine guns, because those are the facts. And the prosecution doesn't really care. They just, hey, he must be a bad guy.
Well, for crying out loud, he might be a bad guy, but if he is, let's put him in jail for something that's legitimate.
Well, right. Good point. But the only evidence that should count as a firearm is something
is actual evidence.
The definition of a firearm.
Right, exactly. I agree.
No, if he is a bad guy and he has been convicted, he has been convicted of some things. But that doesn't mean that everything that was in his possession all of a sudden magically counts as a firearm. It either satisfies the definition or not.
Or it doesn't. Exactly. Very, very interesting stuff. So here we go. Now we're going to wait and see what happens with the forced reset trigger. I think you're right. I think that the SCOTUS is going to do the same thing. Now this, we're talking about, just for clarification, and if you're watching this, we're talking about federal stuff. Your mileage may vary depending on the state you're in, right? Because yeah, the ATF is fine with binary triggers, but I live in California and they're not legal in California. And now the SCOTUS has said, oh, sorry, you can't, ATF, you can't ban bump stocks that way. If the United States government wants to ban them, it's got to go through Congress the way it's supposed to. And so that's been tossed out. But guess what? They're not legal in California. So, and California is not the only state like that. So before you try to get any of this stuff, you want to make sure that you're legal in the jurisdiction you're in. We're talking about federal things. Now, obviously, Dan's not an attorney. He's, retired law enforcement and was with ATF for, 25, 26, 27 years or something like that.
23.
Yeah, 12. There you go. I was trying to give you extra credit. Maybe you get a little bit more money out of your retirement. Who's counting? Then he runs around testifying on this kind of stuff, straightening the courts out and battling with ATF all the time. But he's not an attorney. So I'm not going to ask Dan, although you're welcome to comment on it if you want, Dan, as to how this would affect state stuff. But I suspect that these things can be referred to in cases where lawyers are trying to fight these bans on a state level. But I don't think they have, because it's not a Second Amendment decision. In other words, the court didn't say these things are banning these is a violation of the Second Amendment. What the court said was these were not banned in an appropriate and legal manner. If you want to do it, you got to go through Congress. You can't do it because it was a violation of the Administrative Procedures Act. So don't expect this to be brought up immediately based upon these cases in your state or local area. That's my understanding anyway, Dan. I don't know if you have a different view of that.
Yeah, I mean, whereas the states generally look to federal definitions and use those as a model when they want to form a state definition, and then they can add verbiage to that to make it even more restrictive, as they do in California with, supposed assault weapons and all that stuff. But by the same token, somebody brought up in the last few days, since this SCOTUS decision came out on bump stocks, they said, wow, this ought to have a positive effect on Florida's law on what they call the bump stock law. And I said, well, I beg to differ, because Florida's state law says if you possess any device which enhances the speed, and I'm paraphrasing, enhances the speed at which the thing shoots. If it'll shoot faster with the gadget on it than it'll shoot without the gadget, then that's illegal. that's not based on whether the trigger, functions how many times per shot. That's just based on the fact that it'll shoot faster with the gadget versus without the gadget. So the Supreme Court decision, I don't see how it's a whole different legal principle, and I don't think it's going to affect that. So, the Supreme Court decision is going to affect any state probably which has a law saying that you can't have something that fires more than one shot per function of the trigger, some gadget.
Yeah, but if you're in, like you say, Florida, I think California is more about, does it shoot fast?
Right.
If it makes it shoot too fast, then we can't. And so
which is what Florida does.
Right. And so if you're in a state like that where you have a law like that where, if it shoots too fast, and, certainly I don't think laws get this granular, but I suppose you could have a state law that says if it fires more than this many rounds per minute, then it's a machine gun. And certainly state legislatures could pass things like that. So bottom line, we're talking about federal stuff here. It may or may not affect you in the state that you're in. As I said, your mileage may vary. You want to make sure that you know what's going on in your individual state before you go out and try to order one of these on the internet and have it shipped to you. You could get yourself in all kinds of trouble in state laws wherever you are. But I still think it's a positive development where I think the SCOTUS is indicating, as I see this with all the federal agencies, that if you can't do this at a federal agency with the administrative state, you're not going to get away with it with the Supreme Court with a state agency that's in a part of the administrative state either. Those are going to find their way into court at some point, and judges are going to start tossing them, perhaps, using what the federal court is doing, because they all have to look at the Supreme Court. Well, they're all supposed to look at the Supreme Court and follow those precedents. And then we have places like the Ninth Circuit and stuff like that where they're actively trying not to. But I mean, at some point or other, even that behavior is going to catch up with them. Well, Dan, is there anything else we should talk about? You look like you got something you wanted to say there. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that because of all the states that don't have a state statute against bump stocks and things like that, I'm waiting to see which company is going to come out first that they're manufacturing them again, because Slide Fire went out of business in 2017 when this edict came out, and nobody is presently making bump stocks that I know of, but they're certain to reemerge on the market any time now. And I'm
looking to see if the guys that were a part of Slide Fire don't end up suing the federal government over this, trying to extract some money. Because
I would like to sue the federal government to get the money back for the 4 that I destroyed when this came out, because I had 4 of them, and I videotaped them sitting there melting in a bonfire.
Oh, wow.
I didn't want to go to jail, so I destroyed the ones I had. Do I get my money back? Now that we find out that was unconstitutional. So,
well, there might be a class action lawsuit, in which case you'll get about 38 cents and the lawyers will get all the money. That's how that happens, I'm afraid, unfortunately. Well, now look, if you want to it's just a shameless plug for Dan. Dan is available to testify in cases like this. Reach out to him. You'll find him. You can find a website where he teaches great classes on this kind of stuff called gunlearn.com. And you can reach out to him through that, as a matter of fact, if you want to do that. He's actively engaged in traveling around doing this stuff all the time. He's also a dear friend of mine, and so I always try to take care of the good guys. Dan is one of the good guys. So please,
thank you, Joel.
Please do that.
We just did a seminar last week in Chicago PD, if I can mention that.
Yeah.
And now everybody knows the shootings that occur in Chicago. Well, this was for 35 members of the Chicago PD Firearm Forensics Lab. So if they can reach out and ask for our assistance, then we must be a little bit on the helpful side. So please reach out to us if you think we can help. We're going to do one in Salinas, California in August, and we're doing San Diego Police Department in November. So we're going to be out there in California a couple times yet this year. Hopefully some of the listeners can join us.
Well, when you're here in San Diego, let me know. At the dinner and an Irish whiskey's on me, brother.
Sounds good.
All righty.
Looking forward to it.
Take care.
Thanks, Joel.
You bet. Bye-bye. Thank you very much for watching the entire video. I'm really grateful that you did that. If you wouldn't mind, again, I'll repeat it, if you're not already on Rumble or X, Get over there and be over there. YouTube is killing me over here. So those platforms don't. Much better platforms to be on, quite frankly. And if you wouldn't mind helping out at Gun Guy TV Crew, I'd really appreciate it. You can do that on both Patreon and Locals. I encourage Locals because Locals is actually part of Rumble. And they don't censor me. Patreon does occasionally, not very much, but they do. But whatever one you're on, whatever one you prefer, help out at Gun Guy TV Crew. You'll be able to keep the lights on here, which is always good. And then at the same time, you'll get exclusive content from me that you can't get anywhere else. Well, thank you again. Have a wonderful week. And wherever you go, whatever you do, stay safe.